Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Rhonda Stoppe is dedicated to help women live lives with no regrets. She's the author of 6 books, including Moms Raising Sons to Be Men, Real Life Romance. Her newest book is The Marriage Mentor and is co-authored with her pastor husband, Steve Stoppe. She has over 30 years experience of helping women build a life with no regrets as a pastor's wife, mentor, speaker, author, mom, and grandmother. She's a regular guest on Focus on the Family. She's co-host of this No Regrets Hour right here on the first Wednesday of every month at the 12 o'clock hour and on other popular Christian radio broadcasts. Rhonda helps women break free from regrets that hold them back, grow in wholehearted devotion to Messiah, find victory over people-pleasing, have the marriage others only dream about, build a godly legacy to become more influential than they ever dreamed possible. She and Steve have been married for over 38 years and live out their real-life romance on their ranch in Northern California. To watch free marriage videos or to book the Stoppes for your marriage retreat, visit No Regrets Woman or rhondastoppe.com. Here to co-host the No Regrets Hour and to focus on the book Moms Raising Sons to Be Men. And joining us is a special guest. Not only do we have Rhonda, but we have Brandon Stoppe with us, who is the son who was raised to be a man and the subject of this book. Welcome, both of you. We are delighted to have you. Brandon, your mom is a treasure to us. Your dad is a treasure to us, and we actually got him on TV. We got him for an hour, and
it's a big deal. Yeah. That's a big deal.
It was a big deal, and he actually enjoyed it, and that bothered him.
I think you're right.
So it was kind of unsettling to him that he kind of met somebody that was willing to just keep him engaged at that level, because you know he's that strong, silent but unique. He's a one-man stand with an extended family that's just so important to him, but 2 legs, 4 legs, 6 legs, 8 legs doesn't really matter to him. That's a unique gifting. And so it was a very precious time. It's still one of my favorite episodes. And you bring such an insight of the firsthand experience, because Rhonda has bared her soul and told us what she was like as a valley girl, and the perfume that she wore was, I believe, was Ode to Spoiled. It was Ode to
All About Me.
Yeah. Ode to Entitled was the fragrance of the day. I used to tell people that my daughter was spoiled, and somebody told me all kids smelled like that. So I don't really know how that goes. But welcome to both you and Rhonda to the No Regrets Hour. Right here, we are unscripted, and we're really family. And it's a family hour that I look forward to, and Jason looks forward to every month that we get together. So welcome, Brandon. Rhonda, why don't you tell us a little bit about Brandon and who he is to you as the mom who raised a son and sons to become men. And then we're going to get Brandon's look at his experience, what it was like on the receiving end of this dynamically changing model that wound up being so inspirational and life-changing that he would devote himself to a lifetime ministry call.
This is my son, Brandon Stoppe, and he's a middle child. He's in a bookend between 2 sisters, and he has an older brother who didn't come to our family till Tony was 15. I think Brandon was 6. I think Brandon was 6 when Tony became a part of our family. He's got so many stories about his life. In fact, when you started describing him, I teared up. There's just something about a mother's heart for her son and for her daughters also, because I'm sure my girls are going to watch this. So you guys are awesome too. But you know what I tell moms a lot is when you raise a daughter, it's not really mysterious because all the things that a woman goes through to become a woman happen to you. So you see it, you get it. You don't always like it, but you get it. You understand what, the adolescence and all that stuff for girls. But when a little sweet, soft-faced little baby boy grows into a man, it's mysterious. And the thought of being a part of that is intimidating, it's overwhelming, it's frightening. And what I talk about in my book, Moms Raising Sons to Be Men, here's the cover of it. These are not me and my boys. This is a Harvest House selection of someone who they thought would represent the book well. But at the very beginning, it talks about when I had a son, I knew the responsibility to guide him toward manhood. And yeah, Steve was in his life, and I knew that there was a lot that Steve was going to be training him. And if you're a single mom, hang with us because we're going to talk to you too. But I knew moms can mess their boys up. You can either turn them into a mama's boy where they're, dependent on you for everything. Your daughter-in-law one day won't be able to stand you because you spoiled him. You made him an entitled person. But I also knew I could really control him. There's a section in Moms Raising Sons called Control Freaks Raise Freaks. And in the years that Steve and I were in youth ministry, which was 18 years, you get a long time to watch children grow up in the church, grow up under families, under parents, under moms, and you get to see the effect. There's actually a real blessing in being in ministry because otherwise we get one shot. We live it, and then we maybe have regrets, #NoRegretsWoman. But if we take advantage of observing those that are walking the path ahead of us, the Titus 2 women that I talk so much about in all of my books, that God called them to pour into our lives, I knew I wasn't the mom I had hoped I would be. And I knew I wasn't the mom I meant to be, but I did not know what to do about it. And the more books that you read about being a better mom, I would make a list. But when I realized the list didn't have the power to change me, the list just made me feel guilty. Or if I was doing my, checking off the list and feeling pretty good about it, then there's the pride of, I'm doing it right, which, pride is the enemy of ministry. And I think motherhood is one of the most valuable ministries to which God has called a generation. And so I was desperate to know how to do this without messing my kids up. And I think it became even more, it weighed on me more when I had a son. And I think of Joshua after Moses died, and I talk about this in Moms Raising Sons to Be Men. Moses was Joshua's mentor, his father in the faith, his hero. He watched those Israelite people be unappreciative, grumbling, complaining, all the stuff that he watched Moses have to lead those people through, and how much those people forgot all that God did to deliver them. And then Moses gets mad, hits the rock, the water comes out, and God's like, guess what? You're not going into the promised land. Joshua watched all that. So when finally the mantle of ministry is handed over to Joshua, in Joshua chapter 1, what's the first thing that God says to Joshua? Be strong and courageous. Why? Because he wasn't. It was scary. And I remember as a mom not having courage. And that's what we kind of want to touch on today and kind of keep visiting is courageous parenting, coming to a place of finding the courage for this ministry of motherhood, of moms raising sons to be men. So that's kind of the direction that we're going to go today. I'm curious what your thoughts are or any questions that you might have that you want to jump in, Rabbi.
Well, really the question's for Brandon. Brandon,
I knew you were that.
You had a dad who he's really what you see is what you get. He's hands-on. I can see where he was strong in teaching you right and wrong and giving you the tools and engagement. He's a very engaging individual. So that father-son relationship was probably forged pretty early, and you forged that bond. But mom played a unique role in all of this because Dad was doing what Dad was doing, and you had your time with Dad, but there was that mom time. And that mom time was during a time when your mom was redefining herself. So you actually got to grow up with a mom who was growing up with you and taking a lot of her lead from things that worked and didn't work, and kind of using you as her barometer for effective motherhood of a son. Which, when you look back on it now, you kind of see that interplay as to you would act this way, she would examine it, and she would adjust, and she would do this. Did you feel that dynamic? Did you feel that, if you define relationship with Dad versus relationship with Mom, how would you define them, both similarly but yet different?
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I do remember growing up, we had like a 35-minute drive to get to our house, and it was just like a country road, and it'd be on this windy road, and we'd spend a lot of time talking about a lot of different things. And I remember when I hit like adolescence, all of a sudden things were important to me that hadn't been important to me before, like, you know, friends and what my friends were doing, and wanting to like hang out with my friends, wanting to ultimately feel independent. I think ultimately feel like I was my own man, which, you know, I'm a kid and I'm just, you know, I don't know anything, but there's something in me that's telling me, okay, you gotta be your own man. So on these trips home, we spent a lot of time talking and talking and fighting too. I mean, there was times when we would, you know, like I would be frustrated, and I just wanted her to feel like how I felt, or I wanted her to understand like how I was feeling, or I just wanted her to like treat me differently, how I felt I needed to be treated. But I'm just figuring it out too, and all of a sudden all these desires like that I never had before are coming up, and I look at other men around me and I see like their freedom, I see like the respect that they get from other people around them, and you know, I'm just a kid, but it's appealing, and there's something that like that it appeals to like the inner me. And yeah, I remember like a lot of time of us just kind of like figuring it out, that dynamic, like that's kind of like struggling through like where her place was, where my place was. And I think my goal that whole time is what I would try to do is I try to get the upper hand in the conversation. And my whole entire goal was, just a punk little kid, was to make my mom cry. So I'd say like whatever I could just to make her cry, because at that point, if I made her cry, like I had the upper hand, you know, like I had control. So it was just this game really that like I would play. And even all the things that she tried, I would just try to figure out how to like manipulate a situation, or how to make it more like how to hurt her, I guess is an easy way to put it, which is really mean. But you
really
know,
adolescent.
Yeah. Like I just didn't know how to express myself like in an effective way, and I didn't have the ability to like really step out of the situation and see what was going on. And it wasn't really until actually there was like this resolve in my mom that I don't know what happened. I think you had decided something between you and Dad and how you kind of were going to approach me. But there was this like resolve where you weren't engaging in like all the games that I was playing, and I was really frustrated. I remember one time like driving home and like trying to goat you and trying to get you to like, you know, fight with me or whatever, or talk about like and you were just like, no, talk to your father about that. Like that's not, I'm not gonna like engage in that. And I was just crying because I was so frustrated, because I just wanted I wanted that like affirmation in a sense, like just from you engaging with it and you getting frustrated with it. Because then it made me feel like not as crazy, I guess, because then we were both kind of in it.
We're both crying.
Yeah, we're both crying. So yeah, I remember like definitely those specific trips with the long times that we got to just talk through things, it was definitely a moment where we were both growing. And I could sense my mom like kind of being in uncharted territory too. And so I capitalized on those moments because, I don't know, like you can do that because you're a kid and you get the upper hand, and then you get your way, or you don't get your way necessarily. Like I don't think I ever got my way at the end of it, but
you felt heard.
But yeah, I felt heard because you were hurt, and then you'd leave the car sad, and then I'd be like, haha, I did it, and then I'd have to go talk to my dad, which was not fun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely noticed that. With my dad, it was, I think once like my mom and dad really locked shields on me, like, and I think they always were a team. I think my mom just thought maybe it seemed like she thought like, oh, I'll take care of this, I got this. But then when she really leaned into, you talk to your father about that. It was frustrating for me because I can't manipulate my dad. Like he's just like, he's like you said, he's just like, he's got a solid resolve, and he knows who he is, and he's the man that I want to be, like every bit of it. But at the time, I didn't know that. I was just a kid. So once like I kind of hit that brick wall of my father, things kind of started changing for me. But it was an interesting kind of watching how that relationship kind of worked out between my mom and my dad, and how they addressed me. But once my mom kind of gave like up the reins in a sense to my dad, and I knew I couldn't get the upper hand, couldn't manipulate her, couldn't like get her emotional. I was like, okay, game's over.
It was a game changer.
Yeah.
It really was. And I remember when, as a mom, and any mom who's raising a little baby boy, there's just this connection to your heart with your son. And when they start pushing you away, there's a section in the book that talks about hand him his manhood or he's going to fight you for it. And we don't have a coming of man ritual in our culture. You do, but we don't. And I wish we did. I wish we could say, go on walkabout, kill something, walk on hot coals, pee on a rock, come home, we'll have a party, and we will call you a man. The only thing we really have in our culture that these young boys get is don't be a mama's boy. So mom becomes the litmus test for how much of a man am I if I'm not being controlled by my mom. And Brandon and I just did a mother-son retreat in, was it February? Right before quarantine. So it was so great that we got to do that before the shutdown at Mount Herman in Northern California in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It was a great time. And as Brandon was sharing with the moms some of the stuff he's just shared here, the moms were on the edge of their seat. The moms were crying. The moms were engaging because they're right in the thick of it. And when I used to speak on this topic, I would speak on moms raising sons to be men at homeschool conventions. And there would be standing room only. The moms were desperate to hear it. And that's really where this book was born, was the desperate need that moms had, because it is uncharted territory. And as moms, you're like, I know what to do. I know how, we've done it for, however many years. And when Brandon started changing, you could see it in his face, the way that he would relate to me. And it hurt my heart. I was wounded to my very core, because it was like, you and me, buddy, we're, it's my buddy. And like with, I'd take a nap when the kids were little, and the girls would be like, oh yeah, napped again? Where he'd be like, did you sleep good, mommy? I mean, he was just my pal. And all of a sudden he was like pushing me away. And so when he would say things like, well, if you really cared about me, you'd let me go skateboarding all over town with my friends. And I'm like crying, thinking, how can you say I don't care about you? And then he got me. Then he got me. And so Steve had to kind of step in as a man and give me his perspective. And really, if we're going to hand our sons their manhood, moms, we have to tap out. And I know some single moms are watching right now saying, you don't understand, I'm a single mom. But that's where the body of Christ comes in. Steve was a youth minister for 18 years. He was a father figure to a lot of young men. He hugged these boys. When we lived in Texas, they would walk in. No man was hugging these young men. These big burly football players would walk in, and he would give them, Steve's big bear hug. And they would first kind of bristle, and then they'd come looking for their hug every week, because they just had not had that kind of nurturing affection from a man. And when you have, if you're engaged in a local church and you have your kids part of a youth ministry, If you go to a big, huge church, you've got to find the small groups. You've got to connect so that people know this mom needs our help. And Steve spoke truth into a lot of young boys' lives when their moms were single and telling Steve, what's going on. And he'd be like, hey, your mom works hard. Your mom's doing this for you. Your mom's doing that for you. You don't talk to your mom like that, or I'll come up and rain all over you, And they needed that defense. And that's really where Steve stepped in for me, is he became my defender. And when two men are going at it, trying to wrestle through how he's going to turn into a man, that's natural. That's healthy. And there's always a man or somebody that your son's going to have to grow up and answer to. It's not unusual, but to answer to their mom is almost like, I'm done with that. So one day Steve said, that's it. He came home and I was crying, and he said, that's it. He doesn't answer to you anymore. And I would think I was just trying to get you to sweep the floor, the porch. And he'd done it for years, but all of a sudden this job was beneath him. All of a sudden it was like, which I didn't get that. To me, it was like, just do what you've always done. But Steve's like, he doesn't work for you, he works for me. And so then he told Brandon, you work for me now, you don't answer your mom anymore, but I'm much harder to work for, and you can't manipulate me. And Brandon at first was like, good, because she's crazy. He didn't say that out loud, but I saw it all over you. And then the next day, he told Brandon, I want you to dig a ditch. And we live on a ranch, and the ground is super hard. And he said, from the house over to the barn, I want you to dig a ditch. I forget how deep it was, with a pick and shovel, because I want to run power deep enough. I want to run wires over there, and I want you to dig it. And so then Steve left for work that morning before Brandon got up, and he said, don't remind him. Don't rescue him if he doesn't do it. Don't nudge him to try to get it done so he won't get in trouble. You're done. Which that, as a mom, and I hear moms say this all the time. It's like they want the dad to step into discipline, and then when the dad steps into discipline, they're like, oh, he didn't mean it. Don't do that, moms. You ruin it. You ruin it. So Brandon gets up, and he goes outside, and he starts digging with his pick and shovel all day long. And when I figured he'd be angry, like just come in and be so mad that he had to do such hard work all day. And he came in when Steve got home from work, he came out and he goes, Dad, I got to show you what I did. I got to show you how far I got today. And I was like, what's happening right now? Like the boy wouldn't even sweep a porch. But Steve went out and they, celebrated how far he had gotten with the pick and the shovel. And he said, tomorrow, can I borrow some gloves? Because I have to play, he plays worship music and he hit a guitar, and I'm getting blisters, so can I borrow some gloves? And he was all ready to go dig a ditch again the next day. Something before my very eyes, as a woman, I saw in this boy developing into a man, and I needed to not be involved. I needed to let him work for his father. And there were things that I remember one time when this all transition was kind of taking place. We were all in the car together, and we were dropping him at a friend's house. And I got out of the car to go up to the door to knock on the door and talk to the friend's mom about whatever, I don't remember. But Brandon had said something kind of smart to me. And so as I was up at the front door, I looked back just in time to see Steve's enormous hand reach out from the driver's door. Do you remember this? And grab Brandon by the t-shirt and just pull him to the SUV. And Brandon went like this. And I don't know what Steve was saying to him, but Brandon was like, and I was like, all right. But he respected his dad. This was, and Steve would say, and if you're a dad out there listening, listen to this. Steve would say, nobody talks to my wife like that. And I was like so grateful to have that happen. But it was also Brandon learning, you may not respect your mom, but you're not going to disrespect my wife. And that was a huge turning point, I think, when it was like he realized that. Now, again, if you're a single mom, or if you have a dad that's not involved, or if you're a control freak, because I'll tell you, I know moms that are super like, no, you don't understand. My husband's way more lenient than I am. My husband won't do it the way I do it. And they won't hand it over to the father. And a lot of times the dads, if the mom's a very strong personality, it's not worth it to him to fight with the mom over it. So he'll just tap out and let it happen. I speak at a lot of homeschool conventions, and I see it a lot. And I see moms will say, oh, no, if I let my husband do that, he wouldn't do it the way I do. And they think they have to continue holding on to that control, but then that wrestling match continues with their son.
Brandon, as a young man who's now grown into manhood and seeing your father's interaction with your mother,
Hmm.
and you begin formulating ideas about dating and formulating ideas about family and future and things like this. How did this help you shape the what I don't want to be, what I do want to be, what I want to impart, what I don't want to impart? How should I be living out the model God first, then my wife, then my children, because you saw that exemplified in your home? It was for your dad, God first, then his wife.
Yeah.
And that became a very profound lesson that many young men don't get, because God has an order. And in order to maintain that order, they are one. You can't come between that one, you can't divide that one. So now here you are, you're in ministry. You were and are a PK. Did you find yourself beginning to grab a hold of lessons, not just from your dad, but from your dad in regards to your mom, as how you began to reshape your view of her as, wait a second, this isn't just my mom, this is my dad's wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is, if I'm going to get married someday, and the natural inclination is I'm going to marry somebody who is probably like my mother, and I want to emulate my father's behavior towards my mother, did this cause a paradigm shift in you to say, I really need to approach it from this wholitarian kind of approach, as opposed to this authoritarian or parliamentarian, or kind of this wholeness where mother, wife, couple, family is a unit, but the unit is hierarchical, and the unit is for the benefit of the whole, and that the sum of the parts working in perfect harmony are greater than the whole? Were you beginning in these later development years developing a new understanding of this dynamic and what you wanted to hold on to and what you wanted to let go of? Because I know you and your mom are very close.
Mm-hmm.
The adolescent years are not a Polaroid to be carried into the present and saying this is what it is. No, it's a Polaroid to say this is what it was. And so your past does not define anything other than what your past was. And you had to learn those boundary lessons. Mom had to learn the role that each part plays in these dynamic relationships. Did you find that once you kind of bought in to the family unit, bought into the family vision, that your role was actually elevated, and you found that your world was expanded because you plugged into the power of the cooperative family unit, the right order of the family unit? And in fact, it was out of order until Dad stepped in and said, whoa, we're out of order. We need to, he doesn't work for you anymore. He works for me. This is the order of things. Did you get that order lesson and then apply it in your own life?
Yes, absolutely, for sure. As you were speaking, there were a few things that kind of came to mind. One is, I think, just growing up in our family, if there was any marital issues at all, I don't know, like significant marital issues, I don't know if this would have worked, to be honest. A huge part of why I just knew where to go, like where my place was because how much I trusted in my parents' marriage. Not necessarily like in the moment did I go, oh, I trust that they're married. But as you look back, I never questioned like, oh man, are they going to be fighting today? Are they going to be like not together? Are they not going to be one united front today? I think, if there had been any sort of conflict at all, like, and I sensed that, I think I would have, for sure, being a child, would have tapped into that and tried to like manipulate as best I could. But I never sensed that at all. So first and foremost, I always trusted where we were as a family, based on the model that my dad and my mom were displaying for us. And I also trusted too that what ultimately, like, yes, my dad is like the more authority in the household, but watching how he respected my mom, how he loved my mom, I trusted that the end goal for even his interaction with me wasn't just a dominance, wasn't just like an authoritarian kind of rule. It was for the purpose of actually functioning like the family that God has called a family to function. So I definitely, you don't think about it in the moment, you think about it maybe even later, but all those things, like I never had insecurities there. And so definitely as I've grown up, I've kind of been able to dissect, even as I've started my own family, kind of dissect like, well, what did my family do? What did my dad do? What kind of environment can I create for my kids, so that they know, like for instance, even something simple as like, and we know this, but something as simple as, if my son like asks me about something and then I say no, and then asks my wife about something and then she says yes or whatever, like, wait, hold on, like I stop, I talk to Jesse, I say, hey, he just like turned that around on us, and then we stop and we talk to him about that, like, you can't do that, it's not allowed. So just like those types of simple things, but definitely things that I've taken from growing up, just remembering how important it is for just in the family dynamic for the marriage to be healthy, but also just a model of, Christ in the church too, respecting, loving, and ultimately going into the family. I knew my role, based on what my dad had kind of like set out for us, being this isn't just a time for you to be exalting yourself. This isn't a time for you to be pursuing your own desires. This is a time for you to learn how to serve your family. It's a time for you to learn how to not just think about yourself. It's a time for you to learn how to, practice really having a family of your own, and how you talk to your sisters, how you talk to your mom. Like, that's how you're going to talk to your wife. That's how you're going to talk to your kids. So definitely, I think it's huge. I mean, the structure of my family is huge for how I run my family now and how I work with my wife now. There's definitely differences. Like, my marriage is very different from my parents' marriage. And so, I mean, this is kind of, we're going into a different like role of like, starting a new family and marriage. But there were certain things that like were shocking to me because I expected, classic. I mean, you get married and like you're expecting things to be like how you've seen them.
You're normal.
Yeah, you're normal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely things that like, you have to kind of like, you have to change for like what works for your family. And I can't put those expectations, like I can't put my mom, what I expect of my mom, those kind of expectations on my wife at all. But remembering how my dad just was, how he handled anything in life. And even too, as you get older, you realize like we had some serious financial hardships. And
hashtag ministry life.
Yeah, and I didn't know, I was a kid, like I felt like life was great. And remembering back on those situations and those seasons, and remembering how he just always was joyful, and he never let like the stress or the anxiety like get into the family. I'm terrible at it. Like when I get anxious or stressed, like that's something that I really need to work on. But I look back on my dad and I remember, okay, he did it, and I'm a better person for that because he in a way he sacrificed himself, sacrificed his own desires, to serve the family by, not bringing the stress into the household, by being joyful, by seeking the Lord in those moments.
When you hear your mom talk about who she was before the Lord, and her kicking and screaming into surrender, submission, exchanging her ways for his ways, and the battlefield of her own journey, is it easy or hard for you to imagine your mom as an entitled, self-centered prom queen?
It's easy. It's easy.
I could see it. I think, I mean, obviously, she's a woman that fears the Lord greatly, and she seeks Him. I'm telling you, like, I've never seen anybody evangelize as much as this woman does. Like, legitimately, like, unashamed of the gospel, meeting just a random person saying, "Hey, this is what you need." Like, it's so inspiring. Like, I'm serious. Like there's nobody I've ever met that is like that. Like, so like her convictions for like what the gospel is, for Christ being magnified in her life, it's incredible. And I think that's what I see being refined in her all the time. But I could see, she enjoys life. She loves life, and she likes to laugh, and she likes to play. Yeah, I could see how like that would have been a thing.
If it was unbridled, it would be.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you're genuine in front of your kids. Like he and I, my car broke down yesterday, driving down here, 6-hour drive to Southern California. It was only an hour and a half from Patterson, so Steve was going to come get me and take me home. And Brandon's like, no, I'll meet you. So we literally he drove 3 hours to meet me, which was so sweet. But as we're driving, I'm talking and I'm catching him up on this and then that and then this and this and that. And this morning I woke up and I was like, I gossiped about a couple things. Like and I was so convicted about it. So when he came out this morning, I'm like, hey, I am so convicted about, there's a couple things I told you that shed a negative light on that person. And I need to ask, tell you I was convicted about it. I'm sorry. But I think that's...
And I'm like, oh, I don't remember.
Yeah, but that's the normal Christian life. And if we're going to live the normal Christian life in front of our children, we don't live like we have it all together. We live knowing that I am a week out of the washing of the water of the word and just feeding my lusts to be the woman I never want to be, but the woman I am without Christ. And I feel like having our kids see who we were or who we could be without Christ really penetrates them with the hope of the gospel for themselves too. If we only put our best foot forward and our kids never see anything, or the opposite, hypocrisy. In all the years we were in youth ministry, the number one thing that causes kids to walk away from the church is hypocrisy in their Christian homes. Because at home, everybody's, in turmoil, but at church, everyone pretends that they're the happy family, and that does a lot of destruction. I had a memory when Brandon was talking about Steve being a strong, but also loving, a memory that when Brandon was about junior high and a friend of his had started using some serious drugs and the parents sent that child away to a rehab place. And Brandon was really bothered that they sent the child away. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying the adolescent Brandon was bothered. And he went to Steve in Steve's office. He was in Stoppe's office and he was like at the church. And he asked, what would you do if that were me? Do you remember this conversation? What would you do if it were me? And I just sat back and watched the conversation. And Steve was at his big office desk as Pastor Stoppe. And he said, I would quit my job. I would strap on my nail bags and go back to work in construction. And I would take you to work with me every day. And I wouldn't leave your side until I got you through it. And Brandon teared up. Brandon never tried it. I can remember one time when he was adolescent kind of nuts, I'm like, don't ever smoke a joint because you'll feel better and you'll like it. And I know adult men that don't know how to process their emotions because they started using marijuana when they were in junior high and they've never passed through that. But at that moment, Steve showed Brandon, you are my priority ministry. A lot of times, PKs are not okay because the father says my church comes first, or don't act like that because what will the church think of me if they see you talking in church or whatever. And we elevate that role as pastor as something that the kid has to get on board. And I remember when we first took the job in California, it was 20 years ago now. So how old are you?
About 32.
32. So he was 12, I guess, 11 or 12, right in the midst of all of that adolescent kind of stuff and moving him from Texas back to California. But Steve stood in the pulpit and he said, my name's Steve Stoppe and I'm your pastor. I work for you. My family doesn't. So if you have any issues with my wife or my children, you come to me. You don't go to them. You don't have the freedom to tell my kids you don't like what they're wearing or how they're acting or addressing my wife, you come to me. And he did the same thing with the church that he really did with my adolescent son, is he said, you come through me. I protect my family. That's my priority ministry over all of you. That meant a lot. So if you're a pastor and you're watching today, the points that I think Brandon made was Steve treating me with love and respect, as well as me loving him and respecting him. Can't expect our kids to respect their father if they don't see mom respecting their father. And then also as a pastor, letting everybody know, including your kids, no, you're more important to me than my job. I'll go find something else to do. If I'm not gonna lose my kid over this ministry, God will always have a ministry for me to do, but if I have to step out to minister to my children, I will do that.
Brandon, you are, not because of anything other than the year you were born, and the age group that you represent. John Seal referred to your generation as the new Copernicans. And the center of the universe being, as Copernicus said, was not the earth, but the sun. In the millennial world, the new Copernicans is that the world revolves around me and what I consider to be relevant. And so that's why I kind of put it in that framework. And the assessment was, there was this level of rejection of the church model because of hypocrisy at home. I would see my parents go to church and force me to go to church on Sunday, but I never saw them read the Bible at home, and I never saw them pray at home. And if that's artificial insemination and there is no relevance to your life you live, it is only something you do to perform in a particular context, then is that really relevant to your life? Is it life application? Is it life changing? Is it real? You grew up in a home where your parents prayed, where you saw your father and your mother read the Bible and seek the Lord. You represent one that sees the relevance of that as a lifestyle that keeps you going deeper and wanting to change the world through Messiah. You can also relate to the fact that if that were absent in your life would have turned out radically different, because you would not have that anchor, you would not have that strong foundation of something to mirror, to replicate in your own home, and to let grandma come in and do that with your children, and have them see her do that with grandma and with grandpa, and that it's a way of life. It's not something you do on Sunday. In your ministry, in your worship, in your outreach, in your connection, you draw on a very strong power of having that model and can see the void probably more clearly than I can, because you had it. I didn't grow. My grandparents raised me. They were the Jewish religious. My mother and father were not, and so I saw none of Judaism at home. I only saw it at my grandparents' home, where I spent most of my time because I was very drawn to it. It was very meaningful to me. It was a part of my hair, and I identified much more with an older generation, old world, old Eastern European world, than I did with my parents, who were trying to figure it out in this country, and they were struggling. And so their struggle passed on to us, and I didn't want that struggle, so I gravitated to those who were secure with the Eastern European model. That was my grandparents, and that's how I lived. I carried that all the way through, and that's why I'm a rabbi today, is because of that. And opened the door to me accepting Messiah at 44 years old. And because that void was in my home, I didn't seek after that relationship. It was only later in life that I began to see that there were holes in this theology, there was holes in this ideology, there were holes in this. So in your ministry, when you share what you know that young people did not have, they had this quite hypocritical model, since 80% of churchgoers don't read the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
You know that 80% don't read the Bible at home. They don't read the Bible in church, let alone read the Bible at home. Knowing the model you have, do you feel like you are able to use this as a source of power and strength to help change the course and say, okay, you didn't have it, but you can have it for your family? It's not keep blaming the circumstance of, well, it was too hypocritical, I'm going to reject it. Let's change the paradigm. Let's embrace it for ourselves and for our young children so we can do it different than maybe our parents. In your case, you're doing it like your parents in your own way. But for those that didn't have that, can we be messengers of, you don't have to be stuck in that. You don't have to reject it all because you didn't have it. You can actually be not just a new Copernican, you can be a new Copernican and say that it actually does revolve not around the sun, but around the sun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And change the dynamic. And I think that that's a charge that we're hoping that people of your age and your generation will pick up that mantle and say, we have a new message. And the message is, you're right. You didn't have that upbringing. You didn't have that model, but I did. And let me tell you the beauty of it, because I can replicate that and I can show you how to grab a hold of that so you can be 25 years from now, 32 years from now, your children can tell a story like my story. Yes, there was conflict. Yes, there was friction, but there was one thing that was consistent, and that was that my parents loved each other, and my parents loved us, and we were secure in that, and their love of the Lord was preeminent. My father's devotion to the Lord was preeminent. My mother's devotion to the Lord was preeminent. And now my devotion to the Lord is preeminent, and my family is preeminent, and you can have that, and it's going to have rich meaning to you. And just because you didn't have it doesn't mean you can't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I think about just my father and the choices that he made for our family, I think what he was doing is he was trying to magnify Christ in his life at all times. So I was blessed to have that modeled well. To be honest, I hear statistics about pastors' kids talking about their parents being different at home, and I didn't have that at all. My dad was the same at church as he was at home, frustratingly the same. But you could always count on that. But ultimately, he wasn't trying to lift himself up by any means. He was trying to give a clear, accurate depiction of who God was, who Christ is. And I think when I think about that, I think I could idolize him, and I could choose to be exactly like him, or I could take what he was trying to do and choose to idolize Christ and try to be exactly like Christ. And that's what he was trying to do. And I think sometimes what we do, and I mean the millennial generation too, but we look at that people and we want them to be the definition of who Christ is, or we want them to be God is real based on how they perform, and that's just not true at all. And I understand that, for me, every generation has something stacked up against them. They do. And to say that no other generation had a bad example of a family, what a family unit is, a hypocritical family. I mean, you look at even my grandparents, all were the paradigm shift. They all made the decision that they're not going to do what their parents did. They're going to follow Christ. And I actually, Papa Bill, he just texted me the other day. I can't remember why. No, it was his birthday. So I texted him and I just said, thank you for choosing so long ago Christ for our family. And Papa Bill didn't do everything perfect, but he chose Christ for the family. And I mean, that changed everything. It shifted everything. And you have me here seeking Christ because of one man decided to change things. And he had everything stacked up against him because he didn't have that example. You know, he didn't have the example, the blessing that I have. But he changed the course of how things were going, the trajectory of everything. And he sought the Lord for himself, and he sought Christ for himself, and had to learn, you know, like what it meant to be a father that follows Christ, what it means to be a husband that follows Christ. And he wasn't perfect. He had you know, mistakes that he made, but his pursuit was for Christ, and his pursuit was for Christ for his family. And I think I look at that story and I just think, man, he was by himself. He was by himself, and it's like, and he was able to the power of God, the power of the gospel was able to change a complete line of people, and that can happen now, you know. And while it might take more work and might take like an extra level of faith, because you didn't have, you know, you had maybe a hypocritical family, that shouldn't be the thing. God is always the same. God is unchanging, and there's not like, we shouldn't look at like how somebody performed and be like, okay, that God is real or valid based on your performance. Even my dad, like, even though he did so well, there's so much more to who God is. There's so much more to who Christ is, and it's a pursuit that like he was modeling for me. But I need to do the same in my own life and in my own family. I need to pursue Christ in the same way, with the same vigor. And yeah, for sure, even if you have hypocritical like upbringing, like, you can change the tide. You can be that paradigm. But you're the one who has to decide, I'm going to seek the Lord every day.
And I want to add Tony, our oldest son. He was 15 when we met him. His upbringing was pretty rough. And when that young man decided to follow Christ, and when he moved into our home, he submitted to Steve's authority as his father in the faith. I had to earn the right to be his mom. In fact, he was at A&M University and he got pneumonia, really sick. He was in the Corps, and I went and picked him up and brought him home and took care of him. And I feel like that was the turning point for when I felt like I was finally a nurturing mom to him. But I think of the Apostle Paul, who was the father of the faith for Timothy. He was raised by at least a spiritually single mom. Some historians say his Greek father, was probably not alive at the time when he met Paul. But Paul said it was because of your mother and your grandmother that your heart was ready to receive the gospel when it was delivered to you. So yeah, it's the gospel that changes a life. And, you know, we can look to people and they're going to let us down. But if we look to Christ, he's going to transform us daily. And when we mess up, we go back, we ask our families forgiveness. I feel like the genuineness of that is super healthy in a godly family. And then one of the stories, real quick, from my book, Real Life Romance, I got to put Brandon and Jesse's love story in there. And I don't have time to tell it. It's a great book. Grab a copy. It's a super fun read. Their story's kind of in the back. But one of the things I asked him about Jesse, after he had not seen her, and then they got back together, and he said he was back with Jesse, and he said, I hadn't talked to her in 6 months. I said, well, what is it about her that draws you? And he said, I called her on the phone, and Mom, when I heard her voice, it felt like home. And it was just like, wow, such a wonderful thing. And then as a mom of a son, again, handing them over to their bride, and then stepping out of it. You're no longer the mom that controls the whole situation. Now you pray for them, you encourage them, you help them, you come alongside of them. But I get a lot of emails from moms of sons that say, once my son got married, his wife doesn't want anything to do with me. Evaluate why. Evaluate what are you doing? You're trying to make your son choose between her and him.
Right.
He's going to choose her, and he should. Last point. Joshua 1, be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. Do not turn to the right or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. Be courageous, moms. Be in the Word. Be washed with the water of the Word. Be led. Let it be a chart your path. Let it be your rear guard. One more thing, sign up for my newsletter, noregretswoman.com. It's only monthly, and I'll send you the link to a song that Brandon wrote for me for Mother's Day. It's a little slideshow. It's awesome. It'll make you cry.
And all the marriage videos. As a matter of fact, what's going to happen is you will be able to watch Rhonda Stoppe on the Rhonda Stoppe channel, on Apple TV, Amazon Prime, Amazon Fire, Android TV, and on Roku. And she'll be able to upload all of her teachings to reach our global audience, connecting over 250,000 servers, carrying the Lightcast signal to 110 nations around the world. And Rhonda Stoppe's name will be known throughout the world to moms everywhere, so they can live lives with no regrets no matter where they are. And we're delighted to have the Stoppe family as a part of the Igniting a Nation family. And that includes you, Brandon, and your children, and your wife, and your family. We pray for you regularly because we can't help but see all the pictures on Instagram. And when I say all the pictures, I'm not talking about all meaning, you know, some people have albums and there's 4 pictures, and the albums of 80 pictures. And so, listen, we're watching, we know where you are, we know where you live, we know everything you're doing all the time. You live in a glass house because mom washes the windows of your house to make sure we can all see right in to what's going on as you're living your life with no regrets. We've been talking with Rhonda Stoppe and her son Brandon here on the No Regrets Hour, seen on the first Wednesday of every month on the Igniting Nation Broadcasting Network on this program, Revealing the Truth. I want you to go to ignitingnation.com/apps and find all the new iOS and Android apps, all the new channels, including Spotify, iTunes, podcast networks, all the streaming broadcast networks in 110 nations, washed throughout the world by millions of people hearing this message of living life without regrets. It applies to you no matter where you are, from Singapore to Sri Lanka to Bangladesh to Israel, Jordan, Pakistan, wherever you're watching, in Brazil, all the English-speaking countries around the world, and translated in many languages. And find us on YouTube and catch up on over 1,800 interviews, and go download the app and watch our featured guests and their own channels, and you'll see the No Regrets Hour right there with Rhonda Stoppe. We will see you next month on the first Wednesday of the month. Look forward to it. May the Lord bless all the works of your hand. Love to Stoppe, and we are counting down to Israel 2021. As the months tick by, we're now in July, and we're just 10 months away. And we've been waiting a long time, and we know that the borders will be open and ready to receive all of us on that wonderful trip of a lifetime. You can join us in 2022. Visit ignitingnation.com/events for the 2022 itinerary and registration form to travel to Israel with us. Until we see you right back here for the next edition of Revealing the Truth, stay tuned. We'll be right back.